So we're just going to do, well, I'm just recording a quick little video just to kind of go through a couple of examples where we're going to be looking at essentially internal structure, but just where price action can be a little bit more messy and a little bit more complex, okay? So hopefully this should kind of help you guys to kind of further your understanding. Sometimes when, well, it can just get a little bit confusing, right? So what I'm going to do is going to use these kind of 4 little tools here, right? Just so you can try and follow along as easy as possible of what is going on here, right? So the first thing we want to do is find out where is the current active internal high and internal low at the moment, okay? So if I look kind of back to this price action here, right, we can see the price clearly went up and broke some highs, right? So it's probably very likely that this is going to be, the current leg that we're looking at, right? So if we look from this low here, right, because this was the last candle to first break the prior candle's high, right? So this is a low. So now we can see that all of those candles from then onwards, right, they all broke the prior candle's high, right? So from this low test upwards, every single one of those candles all broke the prior candle's high. So it's all part of the up move, okay? So at that point, that would be our active internal low, right? And this would be our active internal high, okay? But as we can see, right, if I just draw this chalk line, I'll leave that there and we'll duplicate that, there we go. Draw it from here to here, right? We can see that price has just wicked it. Okay, so the internal structure was bullish, right? All of those candles put the prior candles high. This was the active internal high. This was the low. Now we've had a change of character. Okay, hopefully that is pretty simple. You guys should understand that at this stage, right? So I'll tell you what, we'll take this really slowly, right? So at this point now, our active internal low will be that lowest point, okay? And where is the high, right? The internal high is always the nearest high when we're looking at internal structure. So it's not like swing structure. The swing structure, we're always looking at the highest point. But with internal structure, we always pick the nearest high or low, okay? So at this point, this is our internal high, this is our internal low. We've just had a change of character because the internal structure has switched from bullish internal structure. We've now taken out that low, right? With the wick is all we need. That gives us a change of character because the internal structure has now switched from bullish to bearish. Okay, our internal high then becomes the nearest high. This was the last candle, right, that pulled back, that failed to break the prior candle's low. Okay, so you can see that, right? We had a down movement, an up movement, and then a down movement. So that's our last high. Okay, cool. So that's our change of character. Now let's play it forward, and it's obviously going to get a little bit more complex. Okay, so that's a white candle, which means it's an inside bar, which means it failed to break the prior candle's low. Okay, so now we're starting to get that pullback. Cool. Nothing to do, right? We had another candle, nothing to do, right? Until we either break the high or the low, nothing's going on in terms of internal structure. Okay. Okay, now we've taken the low, right? So this is where it gets quite hard when you're testing in terms of trying to figure out what happened first. Did it take the low first and then the high, or did it break this high and then go down? Okay, and that really makes a difference. So let me just move these down so we can really zoom into price here, because I'll make sure you guys can see the details. Okay, so let's bring this back one candle to here, right? And then it's kind of it happens quite quickly, but let's see what happens when we press the next candle. You see, it's impossible to tell. Maybe you guys can. I can't tell which order that happened. But basically what I'm trying to see is that if price first, right, when this candle was printed here, right, if it first moved up and broke this high, okay, so if it went up and then it came down, okay, that would just be a IBOS, right, an internal breaker structure, and it would just be part of the down movement, okay, because all that's happened is we pulled back, we would have pulled back a bit more, and then we would have taken a low. Okay, and all that would just be an internal breaker structure. It would just be continuing the bearish internal structure. Okay, but the other alternative to what may have happened here is that when this candle was printed, is that the low may have been taken first. Okay, so we get that internal breaker structure to the downside, right? We get that bearish IBOS, right? Continuing the bearish internal structure. And then maybe before the candle closed, after it came down, right? Maybe then it came up and then did that. Now, the reason why that's important is because if price first came down and took out the low, right, to give us that bearish IBOS, at that point, okay, when price is down here, that would then mean that the internal high would now be on this candle, okay? So to make sure you understand that, no, we need to go back to here, okay? So at this point here, if the next candle, get rid of this, there, if the next candle, right, comes down and takes out the low, then at that point, okay, this would be the nearest high, right? As soon as this low goes, this would be the nearest high, because that's the internal high, right? That's the last candle that failed to break the prior candle's low, right? So we'd have a down move and then another down move, okay? So this would be the internal high. So if that candle then, right, takes the low, that becomes our active internal high, but then that same candle, right, then moves up and then does that, right, and takes the internal high, then what's happened? Well, what we had is we had a bearish break of internal structure, right? That's why this then became that internal high. But then the same candle comes up and takes out the internal high. That would be a bullish internal break of structure at that point. Okay, so you see how it all depends on what order things happen. So again, I really want to make this clear that if the next candle breaks the low first, right, because at this point, this would be up here. But if this happens right where, I'm going to go over this again, right? I really want to drive this home. I know some of you this is super easy, but for some of you it can be a little bit confusing. Okay, so at this point here, this is our high, this is our low, right? Now imagine the next candle first trades down and it takes out the low. But at that exact point in time that this happens, right, this then becomes our active internal high because we've had another break of internal structure. Okay, so that would become our high, and that would become our active internal low. Okay, and then this here would be essentially your bearish IBOS, right? Your bearish internal break of structure. Okay, now as we know with the next candle, it takes the low and the high. So assuming that it took the low first, right, we got the bearish internal break of structure, and then assume that the candle then closed by taking out the high. Now can you see that in that one, this is the time of that one candle, it gave a bearish break of structure, internal break of structure, and then it took the high. Okay, so then at that point what's happened? Well, this would become the internal high, the low would stay where it is, and then, didn't mean to do that, but then we would have had a bullish internal break of structure, okay, all in one candle. And it's all about understanding or being able to know what happened first. Did it go down first and then up, or did it go up and then down? Okay, so I've just gone over the case of if it went down first and then up, it would have been a bearish internal break of structure, right, which would have been continuing that bearish internal trend, if you want to call it, right? And then if the candle then takes the high, that would be a bullish internal break of structure, which as we know is what? Actually, that's a chock, because a chock is simply when the internal structure changes trend, right? When the internal structure shifts from bullish to bearish or bearish to bullish, okay? So essentially, what I've just mapped out here now is the case where if we come down, we pull back, and then the next candle takes the low and then the high. That would first be a continuation of the bearish internal structure, and then if it takes the high afterwards, then that would be a bullish chock, okay, because we've gone from bearish to bullish, and then this would become the new internal high, and the internal low would stay where it is. Okay, so that's the example of if we go down and then up. Now let's take a look, or explain what would happen if it was the opposite way, where if we went up first and then down. Okay, so get rid of those, I need those. Cool, so what we'll do is we'll, at this point, right, this is the active internal low. That was the last candle to fail to break the, well, that's where we pulled back from, right? So at this point, the internal high is up here. Okay, cool. So we looked at if we broke it first and then came up. Now let's look at if we break up first and then come down, okay? So in this case, if the next candle just goes up like this, right, at this point, in terms of what we care about, nothing's happened. Yes, we've broken this high, but this high isn't anything that we care about, right? Because this is the internal high and this is the low. So until either that high or low gets taken out, really we're not interested in terms of mapping the internal structure, okay? So like I said, if it goes up first and then it comes down, well, what's happened? Well, all that's happened is it's just a continuation of the bearish internal structure. Okay, so at that point, this would become the internal low, right? This would simply just be that internal break of structure because it's just continuing the internal bearish trend, right? We went up and then down, had a break of structure, and then this becomes our internal low, and then we simply just move down our internal high to the last high point, right? The nearest high to that low. And then that would be what happened. Okay, so you can see the difference there entirely depending on whether it broke the low first and then the high, or whether it broke the high first and then the low. It leads you to two different scenarios in this case, okay? Now, when you're in a live market, obviously, especially if you're on the 4-hour chart, right, you can see what happens. You can see the candle forming slowly, right? It's pretty easy to see what's going on. When you're backtesting, you can't really figure it out, right? It's quite quick. So you kind of just have to make assumptions, right? Or what you can do, either when you're backtesting or also in the live market, is you can go and look on the lower time frame and you can obviously see the order in which way price moved, right, and figure it out. It's not the end of the world if you don't know, and I'm going to show you why now, okay? So if we put this back to where it was, and I'm just going to play the candle forward, and yeah, let's get rid of that, and then we'll put this back here, okay? Cool. So, right. Let's play the next candle. Okay, boom. It kind of looks like it took the low and then the high, but I'm just going to, I don't know, right? I don't know for certain, so I'm just going to assume I don't know, right? So what can we do in this situation? Well, what's happened? Well, it's taken the internal low, right? And then the way I would read this anyway, personally, is I would see that as taking the internal low, which then means at that point, that would have been the internal high there, right? This high here, that it took the low. But then in the same swoop, the candle's then broken the high. Okay, so for me, when one candle, right, takes the low and the high, that's called, well, that candle is basically an outside reversal, right? When it trades higher than the low and the high of the previous candle. But in this case, when a candle breaks the internal high and the internal low, that then means that the high and the low of this candle is now the new current or the active internal high and low, right? If you want to call it that. Okay, so that's the way I would see it. So I'm kind of running with the assumption, whether it's kind of right or wrong in this case, this is how I would read it in the market, that essentially we've had an internal break of structure to the downside, we then took it to the upside, right? And then you can essentially call that your bullish chalk, okay? And essentially that's your internal high and your internal low, right? So whether you kind of get it right or wrong, whether it's a chalk or not in this case, it's not going to be ultimately the end of the world, right? Because in this case, it, to me, just more shows indecision, right? It just shows price has taken a high and a low of that small range, and now it's just indecisive and it's moving sideways, okay? And that's basically the way that I read it. So then let's bring it to the next candle. Okay, what's happened here? Another outside reversal. It's taken both the high and the low. Now again, I don't know which order that happened, and I don't massively care because again, like I said, it's just taking highs, taking lows, it's just choppy, it's sideways. So the way I read it is now this becomes the low, right? The low and the high of the candle becomes the new active internal high and low, right? And this is just simply the new range we're within. And that's essentially how I read these outside reversals. Just gonna get rid of some of that text so you can see it. Okay, it's just messy, it's just moving sideways. It's not really of a massive interest to me, but essentially, you know, in terms of using it for trading decisions, that's what's going on, okay? Now at this point, what's happened? Well, the next candle's broken the prior candle's high, right? So I just see that's part of the up move, okay? So we're just sort of continuing bullish, right? This low stays at its place because this is just part of the up move, right? It continues to trade higher. Okay, now that candle's pulling back, okay? So there's absolutely nothing to do in terms of mapping internal structure until either the low or the high goes, okay? Now, because I was viewing this as being bullish and the low has now gone, right? That means we switched from bullish to bearish. Okay, so now what that means is we have a bearish chalk here, right? This can then become our active internal low. Now, where is our internal high? Well, it's the nearest high that took out the low. So where is that? Well, it's the last candle right here, right? That failed to break the prior candle's low, which was this candle here, right? It failed to break this prior candle's low, which means we had a pullback, right? So we came down, and then this candle failed to break this prior candle's low, which means we pulled back, right? But then that's all part of the up move, and then we come down, okay? So yes, this is the last candle that failed to break the prior candle's low, but then it continues to trade up, right? So this becomes the internal high, okay? So we've come down, we've come up, and then we come down, right? So this is the range we are playing within, so on and so forth, right? And then we continue down, right? You just keep moving down the internal low whilst it keeps breaking the lows. So that was kind of just a little bit of messy price action there. And typically it happens, you know, if I could kind of summarize this in a simple way, is if you see the low, if you see an active internal, or how should I say, if you see the internal high and the internal low, both essentially get taken with one candle, right? Where it kind of trades outside of it, however you want to describe it, like this case here, the high and the low of that candle then becomes the internal high and low of the range, right? The internal high, yeah, and low. And then the exact same thing happens again, right? On this candle, it takes the high and the low of this candle. So then, again, you expand the internal range. It's getting confusing because I keep saying high and low and all these words, right? But I mean, you see me just go through it. You can rewatch it there, right? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fast forward price to another example further on, around 6th of November, I believe, just because it was kind of another similar circumstance, and then we'll wrap the video up there, okay? A little bit further forward. I think it was around here. Let me just double check. Play it forward a little bit. Okay, cool. All right, so if we just drag some of these drawings over, okay. So at this point, this would be our active internal high. This would be, I'll show you in a minute, just get the lines over first. Get that there, and then we'll get that here, okay? Cool. So at this point, quite simple price action. The active internal high is clearly up here, right, wherever the highest point is. Now, where is the nearest low? Well, you can see, right, price came up, then it pulled back, came up, and then it pulled back, and then it came up, okay? Excuse me, so this inside bar is the active internal low for me, okay? Because hopefully you guys can see that, right? I don't want to kind of beat this drum to death. You guys should understand that. So let's play this forward, okay? So now we have an inside bar. No, we don't. It did trade slightly higher. Okay, so that's now the active internal high still, right? And now we've pulled back, okay? Cool, so nothing of note until we either take the high or the low, okay? We've taken the active internal high, right? So that means this becomes a new high. Because it was a continuation of the bullish internal trend, it's simply just a bullish IBOS, right? Where it just takes the high and continues up. Now at this point, where's the last candle to fail to break the prior candle's high? It's this inside bar, okay? So this is the active internal low at this point, okay? So let's zoom in and play it forward. Okay, just breaks the high, so it continues up to the upside, so it's all part of the trend, right? Okay, so in this case, did it take the high or the low first, right? Let's just assume we don't know. Imagine you can't read it on the internal price action. So, the way I kind of view this again is it's taken the high and then taken the low, right? So I personally view that as a bearish change of character. But, even if you're not sure, in terms of defining where the new range is, because it takes the high and the low in one go, the high and the low of this candle then becomes the internal high and the internal low, okay? So I would personally view that as a bearish change of character there, okay? But even for me it's a bearish change of character. I'm not really too sure how else to kind of explain that because, this was the high here, this was the low, price has taken the high and it's taken the low. So now, this is the new range we are within. We were bullish, okay? And now we are bearish, okay? That's the way essentially I view that. So now if we pray plus forward again, what's happened? Well, it's taken the high and the low, right? So, who knows what order is in? It doesn't massively matter in my opinion. It just means we're moving sideways as indecision. Essentially we're taking the low, retracing, taking the high, retracing, right? It's not a sustained trend in lower time frames, right? It's just messy, it's sideways. So it doesn't massively matter. And then boom, massive candle again, taking the high, taking the low, okay? So then this becomes the next range we are within, right? So essentially that's the way I view it, okay? So yes, from this point onwards, all of these candles broke the prior candle's high, but there was, a low here, right? We had a movement up, we had a down movement, we then had that movement up, and then this is where it gets tricky because this candle takes the high and it takes the low, right? So that's where I would view that as essentially price taking the low here, right? Yes, it came up, then it's taken the low, and then both the high and the low get taken, both the high and the low get taken, right? So this is just messy sideways price action, and again, the same thing happens, right? And that's what we're playing within. Okay, and yeah, that's it really, and then you play it forward, and then obviously this becomes your new active internal low and your active internal high, right? So if you're using multi-time frame analysis and you can jump down to the lower time frames, okay, when all of this is going on, it can help you to see whether it took the low or the high first. But essentially that's the way I view it. And if you start to see both the high and the low get taken with one candle, now you know how to kind of redraw the internal high and the internal low range, just draw it on both the high and the low of that outside reversal candle. And then it happened 3 times in a row, okay? And you just keep doing that. And yeah, that's just the way I view it. And you just understand that price is very choppy and indecisive at that point. And that's essentially what was represented by the high and the low being broken with one candle in that case. So yeah, hopefully that helps. I wouldn't massively get too caught up in trying to absolutely perfect this and get a perfect read in it, because it's just not super relevant, right? In terms of, getting trade entries and understanding, well, in terms of the actual strategy. You know, there are going to be times when price is a little bit messy, and chalk just becomes, you know, not that relevant to me and the trading decisions that I'm making in that case, right? Chalk's just the most aggressive type of breakup structure. We're just using it in high value areas in which we're expecting price to turn, right? If price comes into, you know, a specific POI that we're looking to trade from, right? We're just looking for that first little sign that potentially structure's shifting in our favor, right? We get that change of character and boom, boom, we're off, right? And if price is in the middle of no man's land and it starts giving us bearish changes of characters or bullish changes of characters, right? It's all over the place. Yeah, fine, cool. I don't really care because it's, you know, not in an area which I'm really expecting price to do anything that I'm interested in getting involved with, right? In the middle of a range or in the middle of a trend, right? This is what happens. You know, it has corrective pullbacks, it takes highs and lows, right? I expect that to happen until price then comes back up to, you know, if I get the box to duplicate, you know, another high value area, let's say at the top of a range, then yeah, now I'm paying a hell of a lot more attention to what's going on with price action, right? To see if we then get a shock in this area, okay? And then obviously if it started taking highs and lows and like this section of price action here, well then I'm going to sit on my hands anyway. I'm not going to be, you know, looking to jump in trades in this. I'm going to wait until we get some clear intention. So price shows me where it wants to go. Okay, now cool, it wants to go bearish. Let's look for shorts, right? When it starts doing this, sit in your hands, right? Chill out. Yeah, hopefully that you took some value from that. As always, hit me up if you have any questions.